Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is the news brief. Today we're going to be talking about, well, some good things that happened to Ukraine and what happens when the world underestimates us and really wants us to be losing. And of course, we're going to discuss it together in the comments so you don't have to suffer alone and I don't have to suffer alone. So please leave your questions, suggestions, thoughts, constructive criticism, anything that comes to your mind down below. I'll read all of it, and I really appreciate this back and forth communication. Let's go. There is this notion that is being put in the heads of people worldwide and also politicians worldwide that this war can never end on the battlefield. It has to end in negotiation. The reality is different, however. This war, a war of genocide unleashed onto Ukraine, can't, in fact, end in negotiation. It has to end on the battlefield, and Ukraine has to prevail on the battlefield. There have been so many times that Ukraine has been discredited and that Ukraine has been underestimated. And some of our failures have been taken as examples of, oh, that's why we shouldn't support them. They have been taken by the Trump administration quite often as the reason why, Ukraine shouldn't receive any more weapons because we're fighting a pointless war that we ourselves somehow started against a much bigger neighbor. That narrative has been in the media for a very, very long time. And the narrative really is that Ukraine can't win, right? And that Ukraine suffers all of these battlefield losses. The reality is that the war has been lasting 3.5 years, while Putin thought that it would last 3.5 days. Then he thought it was going to last 3.5 weeks. And then there were all of these objectives that were supposed to be accomplished in an X amount of time that were never accomplished. Now, recently, there was an offensive of Russians on Sumy that was largely used by Russia and by various European leaders to signify that, hey, look, Ukraine is losing. Now there is an offensive on Sumy. Now Russia is taking territory in Sumy. The front line is crumbling. Russia is trying to create this buffer zone between Ukraine and Russia, right, or temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, and that Ukraine is just doomed. Well, now Ukraine had a counteroffensive on Sumy. Ukraine had returned quite a bit of territory. While it's not a lot, it is really good news because for Russia, it takes years, it takes months to get a few inches of land. And Russia is much bigger neighbor with actually a lot more weaponry and a lot more bodies capable of conducting these offensives. For Ukraine, it takes weeks, right? On June 14th, Ukrainian forces declared Andriivka liberated. A day earlier, on June 13th, Deputy Head of the Sumy District Council, Volodymyr Bitsak, said Russian attacks in the area had been halted, paving the way for a counterstrike or a counteroffensive. Soon after, there were documents published belonging to Andrei Yartsev, born in 1974, who was the general who was commanding the ground forces in Sumy, and these documents belonged to his body, so Ukraine was able to neutralize him. Now, while Andriivka was returned and it's just a village, you might think that that's not really that big of a deal, but Ukraine continues conducting resistance on the ground because returning Andriivka now paved the way for an offensive near Yunakivka, which, trust me, I know that there are so many similar names of villages in Ukraine, but that's why I'm giving you the region, and that's why we're concentrating on a specific area. And it's located about 5 kilometers from the Russian border. And this type of offensive builds momentum and gives Ukraine more ability to strike Russia back. Yes, sure, Russia was able to temporarily get into Sumy region and claim some territory, but they were not able to dig in there. They were not able to hold it. And the fact that Ukraine is already returning it, not even a couple of months after that had happened, is a good sign. Ukraine also has been able to conduct a lot of operations inside Russia that made Russia paranoid, halted Russia's operations, halted their logistics, and made them feel unsafe inside of Russia, which that is the Operation Spiderweb that I'm talking about. There was a lot of, not criticism, but a lot of buzz as to oh, there weren't that many airplanes that were damaged in these areas and stuff like that. But the thing is, it wasn't necessarily about damaging airplanes themselves. It was mostly about showing Russia that we can do something under their nose on their own territory. This war needs to be won on the battlefield, and this war has to be won on the battlefield. It's not going to be won with negotiations. It's not going to end with negotiations. This is just propaganda that Russia has been forcing down your throats for this entire time because Russia knows that on the battlefield, they will lose. But in diplomacy, they have all the ability to claim everything that they want and to get everything that they want by forcing nations into surrendering Ukraine to them. And then they can, like, regroup, and then they can do another offensive and then another offensive until they can claim various different parts of Ukraine. For them, time is an asset, and pauses in any sort of warfare are an asset. And therefore, this talk of wars being commenced in diplomacy, and the need for negotiations has been forced because Russia knows that that's their only way of winning. While they know that if Ukraine continues fighting and the countries and allied countries actually support us the way that we need to be supported and give us the weapons that we're asking for in time, Russia knows it's going to lose. So this Sumy operation only shows that, when everyone is writing Ukraine off and saying that, at this point, obviously, there are not enough weapons, the US is stepping away and everything is just going to get worse and worse and worse, Ukraine shows that that's not actually true. One of the biggest strengths of Ukrainian is ingenuity. This is something that Russia doesn't have. We don't have a lot of resources, and we turn them into things we can use as major resources. Russia has a lot of resources, and they don't turn those resources into something bigger and into something better and into something more efficient. And that's our difference. We can do a lot with very little. Russia knows that. So Russia continues to systematically target Ukraine, and Russia continues to systematically attack Ukraine, not only in the media, forcing these narratives that are not true, that are only favorable to Russia, but also in everyday life. In the past 2 weeks alone, there have been 2 major airstrikes on Kyiv. Now, last week we've talked about the airstrike Sunday to Monday, obviously, and this week it was also Sunday to Monday. As if, people don't hate Mondays enough, Russia wants to make us hate them more. What they miscalculate, though, is that every time a person dies under the rubble of a building in their sleep, every time Russia hits a building, every time Russia ruins a civilian object, every time Russia causes the suffering, Ukrainians are not scared. We're not forced into submission. We actually donate more. We group more. We hate Russia more, and we want to do more to defeat them. And we become more efficient. We become angrier. We become more motivated. You know, this last airstrike was horrendous. It was so bad. It felt like the sky was blowing up minute by minute. And I say this every time after every airstrike that, I've been under many, and this one was much worse than the ones that had happened before, right? Then the next time it happens, I say that it was much worse than the one that happened before. And this used to not be the case. I used to actually say that, like, this was like a bad airstrike, but I've seen worse. But they are getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And when you look at the stats of what the air defense was able to intercept this time, it was less than usual. Normally, when the air defense forces post the statistic for how many missiles and drones they've intercepted, it'll be something like 350 out of 420 drones have been intercepted, and like 7 out of 9 missiles have been intercepted. This time, it was something around the lines of 7 out of 11 missiles were intercepted, and 300 plus drones out of 400 plus drones were intercepted. Kherson was attacked, Odessa was attacked, Kyiv was attacked, various different cities across Ukraine were attacked. It was one of the largest attacks, and it sounds a lot more Armageddon than normal because the air defense battery keeps going off and off and off, but this was brutal. There were so many drones. They kept exploding. I felt like normally you will have, like, I don't know, a 10 to 15 minute break between explosions, or like maybe a 5-minute break between explosions. This was 2 to 3 minutes. And so many sites have been hit in Kyiv. It was 6 separate sites. At least 10 people were killed, and dozens were injured, and dozens, up to 100. So many people were injured. There was actually a residential building hit where 3 of my friends live nearby. And this was one of those airstrikes where it hit an area where so many people that I knew live nearby. Thankfully, they're okay. Some of them don't have windows anymore. Some of them have destruction in their apartment so big that they have to completely redo their entire apartment because, their electronics have been hit. So fridges, TVs, all of that is damaged and destroyed. There are no windows or doors in the house. Door frames have been blown off because blast waves they're difficult, and blast waves cause a lot of damage. And again, this was one of the worst attacks, and it felt worse because we all didn't feel as safe as we normally feel. Not that we ever feel safe, but we rely on air defense, and we know that air defense can intercept quite a lot, or at least the majority, right? And this time, usually it's 3 sites that are hit. This time it was 6. Usually the majority of drones and missiles is intercepted. This time it was not the majority, or it didn't seem like the majority. And it did cause a lot more damage than it normally does. And what Russia is doing is Russia is banking specifically on that. Russia wants to break the spirit of Ukrainian civilians because it's convincing civilians worldwide that Ukraine can't win, right? But it's not convincing Ukrainians. And Ukraine is not going to crumble because Ukrainians know that we're not going to crumble. But if Russia manages to convince us that we can't win, then Russia wins because then there is no resistance from the inside. And that's what Russia's goal is. Russia's goal is to convince the world that Ukraine can't win on the battlefield, and so we need to settle and negotiate. And Russia's goal is to convince Ukrainians themselves that we can't win, so we settle and negotiate. Settling and negotiating for us means that if we stop fighting, there will be no more Ukraine. There might be for a little while until Russia regroups and comes back. And this is their aim. So when you see all of this mass destruction in Ukraine, no, it's not because Ukraine can't win. It's because Ukraine can win. And Russia is doing everything it can and engaging all of the resources it can to make Ukrainians feel like we can't, so we surrender. Because if we don't surrender, Russia can't win. So next time you see a massive airstrike, next time you see a headline in the news that says, oh, we need to negotiate, or you see the American government or any government worldwide talk about the necessity to settle this conflict, the necessity to like settle it in words and in diplomacy, know that Russia is winning. Russia is winning over you. And Russia is winning over that world leader who says that. Because in reality, Russia is losing badly on the battlefield and knows that it doesn't have the time or the resources or the ability to take Ukraine by force. So it's trying to take Ukraine by information warfare. Don't let them convince you that we can't win. Every time everyone writes us off, we come back, like with this offensive with Sumy, like with the Operation Spiderweb, like with Russian oil refineries that have been hit this week. Do everything that you can to talk to your leadership to support Ukraine, because Ukraine stands between you and Russia. And that's what I have for you for today. If you enjoyed this news briefing, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, turn on all of your notifications, like this video, send it to a friend, and of course, leave me all of your questions, suggestions, and thoughts in the comments below, because I appreciate all of them, I read all of them, and I enjoy hearing back from you guys. See you next time.